Well, thank you, Jennings, Michael, Daniel, and of course, Mac. And to answer Mac's question, how much what will it take in OCR fines and penalties to get that tipping point? I don't know. Maybe just you give us a number, and we'll be happy to help. And as far as the other point that many of these matters come to our attention because employees are complaining about each other, well, we'd like to encourage that practice. We think it's good. That is compliance sometimes. Whistleblowing has its place in the compliance infrastructure. Wasn't meant as a joke, fellas. Well, last but certainly not least, I can't speak for Kevin and NIST, but this a topic that we have been attempting to work through for the past several years is how can we make it more efficient for healthcare providers, and both large and small, to achieve the appropriate security settings in their space, and to become aware and implement not just policies, but actual implementation of procedures for both critical patch management and basic security settings for every box throughout their system. Understanding that many folks have user-defined systems, many organizations, although they believe they have administrative control over the desktops in their environment, in fact, there are so many exceptions out there that are granted by administrators at every level that a significant number or significant percentage of workstations in their environment do not have the minimum security settings set by their organization. We went to Microsoft. We went to several organizations looking for partners. Microsoft took up the challenge, and so we'd like to thank Vince Johnson and Eric Mueller for coming here today to talk about some of the solutions that Microsoft would like to offer to help organizations, particularly small and medium-sized organizations, achieve compliance and have minimal security settings or appropriate security settings. So Vince is a veteran of Microsoft. I mean, you can look at this fine gentleman here, and you can see he's been around Microsoft for a while. And he supported the Windows Server for the past 16 years with Microsoft. He has worked on the Security Plus and Windows Server, and he's been around related projects in the federal government. He is a CISSP and has his MCSE certification, and he's been very helpful to Kevin and I. Eric, his colleague, I'm sure Vince will be able to help introduce him. And so without further ado, Vince and Eric.
Sure. Yeah, you want to do that? Okay. And then introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Mueller, and it's typically better to introduce yourself. Hearing one's bio is much like if you feel like that your mom is the one who wrote it, so it's better just to hop into this. And based on Mac's analogy about the hairline earlier, it's only appropriate that I finish this day out. So, excuse me. So today, really what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about healthcare. We want to talk a little bit about the industry. But we also want to give you some insight into what Microsoft is doing about it. Many times when we talk to security professionals, talk to healthcare professionals, there's really not a connection between what Microsoft is doing in healthcare and actuality. Many times that doesn't reach all of our clients. So that's really what we're trying to do is talk a little bit about some experiences that we have personally with all of our clients, some things that we've seen, catch them, and also offer some best practices and recommendations. So today we're going to talk a little bit about data access. We're going to talk about DR planning and readiness. Obviously, over the events of last week, that's very, very important. We're going to talk about healthcare data and devices, best practices, and often, what is Microsoft doing about it? Everybody in this room is a client of ours, and we get that question often, so I want to make sure that we address it. So, understanding the challenge, this is really a mantra that the health and life sciences part of Microsoft, there's 1,000 of us dedicated to healthcare across the globe at Microsoft. That represents not only over 1,000 full-time employees at Microsoft, but that represents as well thousands and thousands of partners that build technology using our software. And the reason I wanted to include this slide is you see this very often. Healthcare is now, the triple aim has been the mission statement for many healthcare organizations for many years, right? Is we want to make the patient experience better, we want to reduce the cost, and we want to increase the quality, right? You've seen this many, many times. What's different now is now organizations are incented to do this, right? Healthcare organizations, they're organizations by definition that are designed physically for output. If you go into a hospital, they're designed for output. They're designed for billing, okay? Everything that they're doing that they have to do has to re-engineer that process. If you talk to a chief financial officer in a healthcare organization, regardless of size, most of them look like I do. They have no hair. And if they have, it's being pulled out gradually, right? Why? Is because they know that they have to redefine their business. They have to re-architect their business. It's a tremendous amount of change that is now coming into the industry, from how these hospitals are physically designed to the business processes and support mechanisms that support the process of delivering care. And I think, as we all know, in the security world, change brings opportunity for problems, right? So, this slide didn't build all that well. This is a great way to, how do you view security today, right? In the middle, you have your government organizations, right? Folks like NIST that are influencing and pushing different recommendations and designs. On your right side, you have insurers. You have thousands and thousands of insurers, from commercial all the way through your government payers. On the left side, you have your providers. Then you have your software companies like Microsoft, like Oracle, like a handful of others that are providing healthcare solutions to the industry. Then you have your standards, your different types of data that is flowing. Unfortunately, what you have now is, as these paradigms are shifting, as these organizations are changing the way they deliver care, now you're seeing exchanges pop up all over the place. You're seeing health information exchanges. You're seeing health insurance exchanges, all a part of reform. What does that mean? That means that we have to share data like never before. Concepts of incorporating the cloud into my business flow, incorporating big data analysis and data scientists into whether it's predictive modeling or whether it's security modeling. All of this now is influencing how you have to measure and look at your business. So this is funny. It's really meant to say, how do your users, how do the people that you're supporting view security on a daily basis? It's magic, right? They don't know how the bits and bytes flow through your switches and your routers and your governance policies. They don't, and frankly, they don't want to understand. What kind of problem does that create for you then? It creates a problem with importance. Security is much like life insurance. It's much like business continuity. No one really appreciates it. No one understands the value of it until something bad happens, right? A storm shelter. If you ask people what is the value of a storm shelter last week, probably would have gotten a lot of, no, it's important. Now this week, I think, it has a whole different shift. Security is much like that, right? Business continuity in general is much like that. So it's really our job is to make sure that we raise, and Max said this earlier, I thought was a good point, is what is the cost of doing nothing, right? Life insurance, if anyone has ever sold you life insurance, they've outlined what is the cost to you when you move on, right? For security, I think it's very important to have those same kinds of discussions. What is the cost of doing nothing? And cost now is not just a fine. It is not just a fine. I'll argue that that's actually a small portion of your overall exposure. As organizations now try to fight for customers, they try to market and brand themselves, anything that you have to publicly announce will diminish your brand. I think we all know that. And if you want to give a reason for a patient to go from one hospital to another, nothing will do that like a media blast saying that there's been a security breach. Because as a patient, what's the first thing you think of? If they can't secure my data, then how are they going to secure my disease, my illness, right? So the state of security, the times they are changing. I think we'll all agree the value of compliance in the past, the cost was higher than actually the accountability metrics that supported it, right? It costs more to be compliant than it did than the fines that would support it. Well, that, as I just said, that's really changed, right? Not only from a brand awareness, but also financially, okay? So I think we've all seen lots and lots of examples of security breaches, right? You can, I think Vince did a quick search, and there were hundreds and hundreds that pop up. And you see all of these great charts that say that data breaches have increased 500, 600, 700%, that fines have increased 600, 700%. The most important thing to think about is, although you're getting swamped with all of this awareness, it's important that security needs positive inertia. We've seen security projects get sideways because they try to boil the entire ocean at first. The important thing with security is once you establish the cost of doing nothing, you have to start small and get momentum. You have to create that positive inertia. That's how you win over your organization. That's how you win over your partners. That's how you win over your business associates, by creating this small inertia.
So let's level set everyone and just let you know that we understand that there is no one magic bean, there's no silver bullet for security. There's several things that you need to do, and in the security field, we always refer to security as we refer to it as like an onion, that has layers. In order for you to really have a really good security process in place, it takes several different organizations within your organization to make it all come together, right? So it's important to understand that there is no one way to do this, and everyone is going to have their own answers. But we want to let you know today that Microsoft is working with NIST and other organizations to kind of lessen the effect or help you work through some of the challenges that you're going to run into when you try to secure your endpoints.
And, I think that's a really good point, because it's not about Microsoft. It's not about Oracle. It's not about Epic. Your organizations have a ton of different technology, okay? And the important part is you can't have vendors pointing at each other. You need vendors that work together, right? Because at the end of the day, as solution, whether you're providing a solution, building a solution, or you're a consumer of a solution, what do you want? You want a solution. You don't want excuses, right? So I've heard this several times over the last 2 days. Technology agnostic best practices, that is an absolute requirement. It's an absolute. Whether it's Microsoft that's pitching that, whether it's another vendor, it has to come down to the least common denominator. That's the most important aspect of it. Because if it doesn't play with everyone, and we all know that there is no magic bullet, you really have to cover the biggest bang for your buck, because those dollars are being fought for. We all know that.
Yeah.
So here's
Eric.
Yeah, that's thanks, Vince. That was good. It's funny. As we talk to clients, I get incredible examples of problems. And I like to bring these examples up because it always gets me thinking, and I hope that you find it gets you thinking as well. So we had a client that gave us some examples of some violations that they went through. This one had to do with their maintenance staff. So their maintenance staff, for union rules, they had to take certain protocols when it came to cleaning patients' room. If you had certain disease types, there was, thank goodness, certain protocols that they had to go through for cleaning these types of rooms. So every day, the maintenance staff would print these reports, and it said the patient, what type of disease, what type of classification, and what the room number was. Well, they were printing these reports, and they were leaving them on the carts, wheeling them around the hospital. They would go and clean. They would take breaks, leave the carts open, not secured. And the most troubling thing is they were taking this information home. They were, again, it's the maintenance staff, they didn't realize that they were doing anything wrong. They were taking this information home, they were leaving it on the front seat of the car, and the only time it became aware was because someone broke into a maintenance person's car, found the data, and tried to steal one of the patient's identities because of it. They were caught, but it did open up a whole aspect of, and really the whole aspect of, well, the data was needed. The maintenance staff, they really did need to find that information. But again, it's coupling not only access to the data, but with social awareness, the right training, the right protocols in place to make sure that everyone is aware not only of the data they have in front of them, but the right procedures and protocols it takes to make that happen. So this is where I'm going to bring in my technical wizard here, and he can walk through a little bit of the details of how we made that happen.
Sure. So one of the things that we really need to take a look at here is how are you allowing access to your data? It's important to take a look at your user accounts, your user account lifecycle, your administrator accounts. All these accounts need to be taken a look at, and there need to be protocols put in place around them to ensure that they're not being used improperly. Okay. One of the big issues that I see a lot when I go on site and talk with healthcare customers is they often say that, we want to have a more secure user account lifecycle. But the problem is if we force the users to change their passwords too fast, they'll write them down on the sticky note and post them to the monitor, right? So, my next question to them is, well, what kind of training have you done with these users to make them understand, how to create a password? How do you cycle through passwords when you have password history? The training that goes along with that oftentimes is very lacking, and that a lot of times it causes problems with how you're going to handle your user account life cycle. If users cannot remember their password from month to month and they're flooding the help desk with calls, of course we're going to have to lessen our policy so that we can make it through the month without killing our staff. So there's some training, and one of the things that you're going to hear me say over and over again as we talk is that end-user training is very important in this process. We have to make sure that we train properly and that we continue to train our end users so that they are responsible users in this process. We have to make them responsible, and we have to hold them accountable when there are breaches and problems that happen with our data. Something else you want to take a look at is your administrator accounts. You really need to lock those down. One of the things that we do, that we did in the federal government when we did the U.S. GCB settings, or United States Government Configuration Baseline settings, which was geared toward federal, was that we forced the rename and the disablement of the administrator account. It's going to be very important. And like the Oracle guys were talking about earlier, auditing that is going to be very important. We need to watch and see who's trying to access the administrator account, particularly if it's like a repetitive kind of thing, because that's going to be a clue that there's a problem. Okay? We need to watch out for, and we need to regularly notify users of our security posture. We're not going to change this, and if you're in violation, then there will be consequences that have to happen. And the problem is that I see a lot of times when these consequences happen and there's the hammers to be, is supposed to come down, a lot of times it doesn't. And in our policies, we lose bite in our policies because the users realize that, well, there's not really going to be any consequences that happen here. So we have to follow through with that in order for it to be meaningful, okay?
It's, something I think everyone's talked about too is we're talking thousands and thousands of possible events daily. What do I do with that? Right? You have 4 or 5 people that are dedicated to security. That's overwhelming. Most of your organizations are evaluating a concept called big data, right? They're doing it for a lot of different reasons. Mostly what's driving that is revenue integrity, right? As new reform measures kick in, and as we go from a quality or a quantity-driven reimbursement model to a quality-driven reimbursement model, these big data concepts, predictive models, things like that, are put in place to protect our revenue, right, from readmission penalties and a variety of other things. I'll argue that it's very important that when we talk about big data and we talk about predictive models and analytics, security has got to be right next to it. It's got to be right next to revenue integrity. Why? Is because you have to do more with less, right? Everyone's budget is shrinking. The technology is certainly there to help mine that data, to help come up with pattern analysis. Whether it's a Microsoft platform, an IBM platform, an Oracle platform, it doesn't matter. The important thing is the technology is there. And many of your organizations are already looking at it. They're already coming up with big data type concepts, right? The important thing is being able to articulate and measure what is the cost of doing nothing, right? And making sure that whether it's your CFO, your compliance officer, whatever the case is, making sure that they're aware that security needs a place at that table, that this technology can be used. We can take advantage of some of the folks that talked earlier about what are the variables, what are the common patterns. It can be used to do it. We know it. We've seen it. And it's honestly, it's a lot easier than trying to figure out what makes a patient sick or healthy. Trust me.
And one last point on this slide before we switch over. It's important that as you go through your user life cycle, that you have processes in place that identify accounts that are no longer in use. I can't tell you how many times I've been on site with customers looking through their Active Directory, and I'm an Active Directory expert, but looking through their Active Directory setup and looking at user accounts that haven't been in use for a very long period of time, but they're still active and available on the network. Okay, so those are direct ways of hacking into your system. I mean, you wouldn't know any better because those are active accounts in your environment. So one of the things that's really, really important is that you go through these exercises, I would say like quarterly, where you actually find accounts, and there's many different ways of doing it, finding accounts that are no longer in use in your environment, and then using some type of quarantine method to either move them out, disable them, or something along the line so that we can easily identify them and make changes to those so that they can't be used in the environment.
That's a good point. Good point. So, second story that I wanted to talk through, this really speaks to the disaster recovery issues. We've seen it in Joplin, Missouri. We're seeing it now in Oklahoma. We've seen it with Hurricane Sandy, right? Disaster recovery, business continuity, it's something everyone needs, right? I don't think anyone will dispute that. But many times when you exercise your business continuity practices, when you exercise your testing of scenarios and you walk through these tests, many of the vendors that you use in these scenarios, you don't practice with. They don't understand what it is to have sensitive data. Here's an example. At Hurricane Sandy, we had one of our customers, they had contracted with a drive recovery service, right? In the instance that their hardware had become inoperable, they contracted with a firm that specialized in drive recovery, right? If they couldn't retract or extract the data, they would send these drives off to a firm. The firm would come in and help extract this data, help rehydrate it, as we call it. Well, what happened was as they sent these drives to this firm, the firm then, once they rehydrated this data, essentially fixed the hard drives. That data was then made available to their internal teams. What happened is the folks that worked at this recovery firm, they went in and changed patient bills. So if Aunt Sophie had a $20,000 bill, they changed it to $20. They went in and stole patient identities. They stole credit card information. But worst, really what was the most despicable thing is they were selling the information, the Medicare information from the patients on the street. So what the CIO went through this exercise and thought he was a hero. He really did. He thought he was a hero. He had the right business continuity practices in place, had the right procedures in place, had the right contracts in place to prepare for the rainy day, quote unquote. But 2 months later, all of this came to light. Patients started getting fraud reports. They started getting questions from Medicare. And after it was traced, it was found out what the problem was. At the end of the day, the CIO lost his job, and so did several other folks. It was an oversight, absolutely right. It was an oversight. But it also outlines the importance of, even in your business continuity strategies, even in those rainy day processes and procedures, make certain not only do your vendors understand the type of data that you're sending to them, but make sure that you're bringing them into the process. Make sure that you're testing these processes and services with them, because it doesn't matter. Unfortunately, I think it was Deborah that said it earlier. As you go through these disaster recovery processes, and it's so important to get the systems back up and running so you can do what you do best, which is deliver care, that's exactly when something will happen. Mm-hmm. That's exactly when it will happen. Whether it's a hacker that's trying to gain access into your system, as you bypass your own protocols, as you bypass your own procedures, unfortunately, that's when the worst does happen.
Mm-hmm. So, as Eric was saying, generally this is when we find hackers. This is when they like to really take a look at what you guys are doing during the disaster, because a lot of times your services are down. Sometimes, depending on how bad the disaster is, you may have to go all the way back to paper and pencil, right? And in those scenarios, hackers are just out there waiting for you to find out those soft areas where they can either attack now or get in there, put software in place that I can activate when I'm ready. Okay, so it's very important that during disasters that you maintain your protocols, that you follow your security steps, and that you don't lax. You don't let your guard down at that point, even though you're trying to get your services back up and running and take care of patients as quickly as possible. It's very important. As well as you're moving hardware out of your inventory, as hardware ages, that's going to be another area where you need to track very closely. We need processes in place to handle what Eric was talking about when our hard drives are either destroyed or as they're aged, right? Same thing with our data. As we reach those points where the data is aged and we no longer need to maintain it, what do we do with that data, particularly when it's on the tape that's stored on an off-site security location? How do we handle that, and what are the procedures around that? So it's really important to have and make sure that everyone is trained up on those so that they can act appropriately when the scenario hits.
So this was something that Deborah said earlier, and I couldn't echo this more. Know the value of your data. We had organizations that we talked to, many small healthcare providers that would tell us, no one's interested in our data, right? We're in the middle of nowhere. We have, 50 beds, and no one's going to hack us. Well, it's actually nothing could be farther from the truth, because that's exactly what the nefarious types that are hacking into healthcare enterprises, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the 25, 30, 50-bed hospital in the middle of nowhere, because they know their security protocols are not going to be up to date, right? They know that their process and procedures are going to be lax, because many times they're struggling, right? So it is very important to understand the value of the data. I think the value of healthcare data, as we go through all of this change, again, earlier I said when we introduce change in any industry, that is a window. Well, there's a lot of change that's not only happening as it relates to healthcare reform, but when we start introducing the concept of ICD-10, and that's how we diagnose and code claims in this industry, we're introducing a tremendous amount of change. And ICD-10, if you're not familiar with it, it's going to have an enormous impact in our industry. And if you don't know anything about it, you will. It is coming. But what that does is that introduces an opportunity. That introduces a tremendous amount of opportunity. It introduces opportunity for fraud and abuse, introduces opportunity for anyone to gain access into your systems. Because to accommodate with any new regulation, any new change, what do you have to do? You have to upgrade. You have to buy new systems. You have to buy new services, right? And as you get old legacy systems and new software, that almost always bridges or creates some kind of gap in your security protocols, because you have a new set of systems that have the latest and greatest of protocols and procedures and governance models, and then you have old legacy systems that don't. And it's impossible to keep a level of governance across all of your different platforms that are consistent.
So it's going to be very important that we assign a data custodian to your data. What's really important here is that we need to have someone that's going to be responsible for the data, someone that we can hold responsible for any breaches or any issues that happen with the data. We want to make sure that we're constantly documenting, responding to security incidents. But one of the most important things here is that we need to make sure that all of our data, software, hardware, all that stuff is up to date when it comes to security patching. The lack of security patching in your environment is going to be the number one hack vector for hackers that are coming and looking at your data or trying to look at your data. There are so many tools available out there when it comes to hackers. So once I get a foothold in your organization to search your organization and start looking for certain things, it's almost a foregone conclusion that once I get in, I'm going to find what I'm looking for. So it's very important that you maintain patching on all of your devices, software, hardware, everything. And that stuff needs to be regularly checked and ensured. Now, one of the issues that we run into often, being from Microsoft and dealing with different aspects of the healthcare business, is that we often see specialty pieces of equipment that run into issues when it comes to patching. I was talking to a lab company not too long ago where they had this ARM thing that all it did was, this one little thing, and it was important because it had to run 24/7, right? So they're asking me, well, how do we handle patching on something like this? And I'm scratching my head. I'm like, I'm not sure, because there are certain times that we need to ensure that the machine running that ARM has maintenance and that we patch it appropriately. But if we take it offline, then we have production issues, right? So there's a fine line that has to be met there, but it's important that you still update those systems because if they're on the network, they're available to folks, whether they're interior or exterior to your environment. So there are big consequences for having outdated software or hardware in your environment. So make sure that you constantly patch, be vigilant in that area because it's very important. And what we refer to in the hacking world is areas that we really want to find, okay?
So it's an important best practice, I think, that we've seen very successful is this concept of a data custodian. Really what this means is marrying operations with technical folks. Many times, a breach is a gap between the two, right? It's a gap between where technology fails and either physical or operational process security meets, right? So what we advocate, and we've seen many of our clients very successful at, is make sure you bring those two arms together. Make sure you marry the technical folks with someone who's accountable for nurses, for example, or hospitalists or care managers, right? What it does is it empowers someone in your security team to operationalize security, but it also brings your users into the concept of social engineering, right? So they really feel like they're not being told security, they're able to talk with the teams and have input, right?
Participate.
So the next, I know we're getting close on our time, the next concept is devices. So devices are here to stay if we haven't figured that one out. Devices, whether they're mobile devices, whether they are tablet devices, whether they're TVs and motion-sensitive devices. You will see many of this coming in the near future. Whether it's a mobility, devices are here to stay. In the last 5 years, we've seen an incredible increase of devices, whether it's smartphones, whether they're tablets, really across the continuum. So when we talk to our clients, we see a lot of different opinions when it comes to devices. We see some clients that are still trying to figure it out. Do I create a BYOD device where employees can bring their own device? Do I embrace applications or the cloud? Do I take an agnostic approach where you can bring any type of device? I think the bottom line is we want to make sure that you understand it doesn't matter what type of devices you support. Having no philosophy or having no type of governance policy as it relates to devices, obviously that's what's going to get you in the largest amount of trouble. We also get this a lot, is that CFOs come back to us and say, I'm tired of people asking us to buy a new device. Stop asking me for more money. I don't have it. Well, the innovation curve for devices is growing much faster than security policies and procedures, right? So it is important that any governance policy as it relates to devices, applications, cloud strategy, when you're on the high end of the innovation curve, which for many of us in healthcare, this is the first time we've been here, so enjoy it. But when you're on that high end of the innovation curve, your policies and procedures and governance processes need to support that, right? You can't just create them and forget about them. It's something that needs to continually get updated and be adjusted.
Right.
So again, BYOD, we've seen, I'm happy to talk to anyone individually about this. I've seen the largest organizations in the planet dip their toe in the water when it comes to BYOD, and I've seen them miserably fail. So I'm happy to walk a lot of folks through it, but I think in the security world, if you're going to allow people to bring your own devices, I always ask them, would you allow people to bring their own laptops and just plug them into your network? Mm-hmm. That kind of answers it for many people right there.
So when we talk about securing devices, there's a lot of things that go into it. And this is the area where Microsoft has done a lot of work with NIST, and we're going to continue to do a lot of work with NIST to ensure that we have the proper security settings available for the different operating systems to properly lock them down. Now, the issue with locking them down a lot of times, though, is that in the process of locking them down, not only are you going to make the device harder to work with, but you're also going to make the device or the software sometimes not work as well as it should. So there's got to be a lot of testing that goes on with this. We just can't do this blindfolded, throw them out there, and hope for the best. There's a lot of testing that goes on with these. So some additional information about this is that Microsoft right now is working on some what we refer to as group policy objects, and basically a group policy object is just a group of security settings that lives within Active Directory, which we can push out to end users. So we're working right now to create group policy objects for your Windows environment around HIPAA. There are already group policy objects out there for USGCB, which I referred to earlier, and DoD has been working on this a lot in the past, and they're still actively working at this. I've seen a lot of healthcare organizations, particularly those that do transactions with like the CMSs, CHSs of the world, where they have to maintain certain levels of security. So there is a lot of security information that goes into these group policy objects, right? So just to let you know that we are working towards some groups of settings that make moving toward the HIPAA security rule simpler. I'm not going to say easier because there's still a lot of work that has to be done as you do this, okay? The next important thing when you're securing your devices is ensuring that your data at rest is protected. So encryption is going to be highly important. As I was reading earlier the different articles that talked about breaches that are happening out there, you'd be surprised at how many organizations are not doing any encryption in their environment. I was just really appalled at how many organizations allow users to walk around with devices, particularly the smaller tablet-type devices, with just patient information on them, and they're not encrypted. It was a lot. Of the nearly 90% of folks that were doing BYOD, they were saying like 40% of those devices within those organizations were not encrypted, and which is really bad because in scenarios where they get lost or stolen, you're going to have a breach notification at that point. Okay, even whether it be internal to your network or external to your network, client-server security is very important, particularly when we're dealing with our health information exchanges and stuff like that. We need to make sure that that data is encrypted on the wire, and we feel comfortable that that data is encrypted on the wire. We need to watch out for such attacks as what we refer to as man in the middle, where I can fake you out, and you think that you're talking to a particular website, but you're actually talking to me, and I'm just looking for data and passing the rest of the information on.
We've actually seen this with many clearinghouses.
Yes.
Right, where a lot of your revenue cycle departments use a clearinghouse actually to manage claims, to filter claims, to work their AR. And we've seen many of these clearinghouses spoofed so that people are actually uploading claims to someone else.
Right. And that data is very, it garners a lot of...
It's bad to share with others.
Yeah, well, we get a lot of money for it, too. We can make a lot of money off that data. The next thing is your encryption. Where are you going to do your encryption? Are we going to do it at the file level? We're going to do it at the folder level? It's important that we look at full disk encryption and we come up with an enterprise solution around full disk encryption. And the reason being is that once the drive is encrypted, all the data on that drive is encrypted. When we look at folder level encryption, there's a possibility that we can move files and they're no longer encrypted. Okay, so a best practice would be full file level encryption, full disk encryption versus a file level encryption piece of software. Device governance, I think Eric's kind of talked to that one pretty well. We just need to make sure that the devices that we're going to be using in our environment are securable, that they have the mechanisms within them, within their operating systems, that we can reach out and do those things to them that we need to do to make sure that they're secure. Pushing down PINs, pushing down specific types of passwords, pushing down encryption to these devices is very important. Whether it be your management system in-house or your mobile device management system, it needs to have these capabilities. Okay.
I was just saying that I think our goal with creating these best practices, these GPOs as we call them, is I think any technology steward when it comes to healthcare should reduce the friction of implementing technology. Many times, especially for the small institutions, they can't afford large security departments. They can't afford to hire high-tech security firms to come in and keep them up to date. So at Microsoft, we feel it is our responsibility to help reduce the friction of implementing these policies and best practices. We create technology that's flexible, and I think flexible also can be a euphemism for complicated at times, right? So there's a lot of bells and whistles and buttons, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to create the system that is appropriate for your organization. However, many organizations don't need all of that. What they need is security. So that's what these GPOs are designed to do, and you'll see a lot more about that
coming soon.
Coming soon, yes. We're working with NIST to publish those, and you'll see it at the Microsoft.com/health site, but you'll also see it with NIST as they push out new policies and frameworks. And again, it is technology agnostic, right? That's the one thing that we want to continue to push.
Right. Oh, wait a minute, go back. I got some more stuff. One more thing. So make sure that your endpoints are properly running the proper AV software. One of the big issues I see in organizations all the time is that they're running AV. The problem is that they're running old AV. They may be 1 or 2 versions behind. And within that, they may be totally patched up too on that old version of AV. However, because it's an old version, there are security vectors that are available that hackers can get into. And just because you're not running the latest version, you're opening up risk in your environment. Okay? So now, to help us manage all of these group policy objects and security settings, Microsoft has come up with a tool called Security Compliance Manager. It's a free download from the internet. And basically, it allows you to pull what we refer to as these security baselines into this tool and review these particular security baselines. So one of the big issues I run into all the time with customers is that once we go into meetings and talk about how are we going to lock down these systems, is we get into these back and forths about what a specific setting actually does. What's cool about this tool is that it actually spells that out to you. It goes through the risks, it goes through the vulnerabilities, it even marries up the different settings with CCE numbers that are used to identify vulnerabilities, right? So it takes all that guesswork out of, well, what does this particular setting do? So it's spelled out for you. It tells you what the vulnerability is. And then you can actually edit and you can output these security baselines to however you want to implement them, even out to an Excel spreadsheet where we can committee on them more. Okay? So it's a very interesting tool. It's in version 3 now, so it's been out for a couple years. And we feel very comfortable with the tool. And if you have an opportunity, please take a look at the tool.
It's free.
Yes, it's free.
Absolutely.
So,
Any Q&A?
anyone out there?
The hairline is continuing to recede.
Yes. And we know it's after 5, and you...
That's right. Well, anyway, we're glad to end this up. We appreciate the invitation. And
Oh, wait a minute. We got a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right.
It's only 4 o'clock Central Time.
That's right. That's right.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming here and to thank Microsoft for picking up and making commitments to in recognizing the need for helping users and particularly those in the healthcare sector to secure their information. So you had mentioned that you were working on a policy object to help drive minimum settings for HIPAA security. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you had a timeline for when you might be able to introduce that or at least do some draft versions of it.
Sure. So we're actually testing them now. We actually have draft versions of these now. They're being researched by internally at Microsoft as well as some of our partners. So right now we're just garnering feedback as to what, because one of the issues with security baselines, it doesn't matter what your platform is that when I lock it down, it's going to cause problems, right? Whether it be from the system itself, for the software. So what we're doing right now is we're testing them, trying to
Right.
ferret out all those kind of issues. And then as we get closer to that, so I'm thinking probably closer to the end of the end of the fall, going into a Christmas time frame.
Yeah.
And one last question, not to prolong this. Recently, Microsoft announced its end of support for the XP platform, and I have to tell you that. At HHS, we run on XP as well as unsupported versions of Internet Explorer. It drives us batty.
Yep.
So, can you provide some advice on those who are currently on the XP platform and how they can prepare?
Sure. I think that part of our and it's not just you. It's 60% of our clients are still on XP. And as we create new products, as we create, whether it's a new Xbox release or whether it's a new operating system or it's a new database structure, as we create these new policies, we've actually baked in HIPAA security into how we develop our software now. So believe it or not, in all of our product development teams, there's a HIPAA scrum, right? And we develop these tools internally to develop against, not only in healthcare, but financial services as well, and government, a variety of different security protocols. But we do that because we want to make it part of our DNA, right? And everyone knows this, if you've worked in healthcare for a long time, and you've certainly the security aspect, you either understand it or you don't. There's very little in between. So to get to the point about XP, as we've developed these new standards, as we've developed these new software practices, it's really taken us to a new level with some of our latest software releases. And unfortunately, it's left some of the capabilities of software that we developed and released 12, 13 years ago behind. And there becomes a gap when when it comes to your user experience, what does it take to keep a secure environment up to date? And when are you starting to reproduce the environment that you already have developed? And for us, we've reached that point. So, one, as you make migrations away from your existing platforms, XP, to new platforms, that's why we're here, right? The Microsoft team is here to help you. And I know that's almost cliche to say, but that is what we're here, especially in healthcare. We have a team in health and life sciences to help make those migrations, whether it's Vince and his team handle the security aspects, whether it's the strategist to help you understand the operational aspects of it, whether it's, when it comes to how do you make the financial pitch when you just spent $100 million for an Epic implementation. That's what we're here to help with. So we have a variety of different resources. We have a variety of different partners to really help you not only understand moving from one model to another, but make that as frictionless as possible.
But not only that, though, what about those scenarios where you want to implement some of the newer features that are available out there? For instance, being mobile, using tablets, touch, pen. Okay, so a lot of those capabilities are not going to be available under Windows XP. So if you're looking to incorporate some of these newer features into your environment, you're kind of stuck on having to make a move here. Now, we do feel your pain when it comes to having to make the move off XP. We get so many high praises about Windows XP, and that people really love the platform. And when it comes to having new applications running on the newer platforms, there could be some pain there, some projects that need to be spun up to handle those. But it's all about new features and new capabilities. Okay, and one of the big ones that we see in healthcare is that mobile platform. As a matter of fact, we're going to be working with the Center of Excellence to ferret out some of those newer mobile device scenarios and how to secure those. So think about the new features, and that's another area that you may want to consider when you're holding on to XP for dear life. Okay.
But if there's any questions, we're happy to hand out cards and answer any specific questions that we can. I know we're running in our time. But
yes.
Thanks, everybody, for staying.
Yes.
Appreciate you.